Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about the Twilight Zone from the 1980s. This is season 1, episode 23. There's two stories in this episode. They are called Shadow Play and Grace Note, respectively. This is a Patreon sponsored review, so thank you very much to Cindy for picking the show. Pretty even split. I mean, the first story's a little longer than the second one, but it's not like too lopsided. They're pretty even overall. So the first of the two stories, Shadow Play, is actually a remake of an original series episode, which, to be honest, I didn't really remember it as I was watching it. It was only just afterwards when I was getting the information up that I saw it mentioned and went, wait, it was? And I googled it and did a quick read of what the original was. It was a season 2 episode of the original show, and I could not for the life of me really remember it. Which is wild because I do think the premise is quite memorable based on this version. That being that a prisoner on death row is convinced that he is actually just living in a continuous nightmare that keeps looping. And every time he dies, he gets hanged for murder. He just starts back at the start again where he's getting sentenced. And it just kind of keeps going over and over. But the interesting part, though, isn't so much that, because I think that on its own is a cool premise, and that you could get like a really cool psychological movie or story about someone who, like, you could really have the audience question: is it a dream? Is it reality? Is he just someone whose mind is trying to like protect him and make him think that it's not exactly what it is, to maybe hide the fact that he did something terrible or something? You could build a whole story around that, but that's not what this does. And just from glancing at what the original did, that didn't either. They both actually go in this direction where it starts to focus more on the other characters, bizarrely. Where the other characters start to maybe question if they are just living in his dream, and therefore, if he dies, they all cease to exist, and then that becomes kind of a motivation for them by the end to try and stop the execution. Which fails. The main character says they're going to try, and it always fails. It plays out exactly like he remembers it. And there's lots of little hints showing you that he remembers these things, and it plays out the same way every time, because he can predict what they're going to say. He mouths what they're saying as they're saying it. And there's a really cool hunting scene early on where he describes the process of going to the gallows, to being hanged, and he describes the doors that he goes through. He describes his hands being tied up, the way the door opens, and all that. And that's kind of what actually convinces one of the prisoners that this is a thing, that he believes that he's in his dream, and he's concerned that they're all just going to pop out of existence when that happens. And sure enough, that is what happens at the end of the story, is when he does get hanged, they kind of blink out of existence one by one. It's such an interesting story, and it's actually fascinating to me that it was in the original show to some extent. It's a shame I don't remember it very well, because I'd love to compare how they both handle it. Because one of the things that was running through my head as I was watching this is how it's kind of a little bit ahead of its time, in the sense that it's effectively a story of NPCs realizing they only exist in a fake world, and they want to maintain that fake world because then they get to keep living. That's kind of the direction it goes in, and maybe this one emphasizes that a little bit more. I don't know. I think one thing that I was thinking, though, to give it like a critique, is that it did feel a little bit like extreme, just how quickly like the defense attorney shows up at the DA's house and is saying, "Hey, do you have a backstory? Do you remember when you and your wife got married? Do you remember doing anything?" And this idea that their entire existence immediately is not computing. Like there's these blank spots that we can't explain because they don't exist. They were never written to exist. And it feels very meta in a lot of ways. I was almost thinking about it as well, as that the main character inadvertently has become a god to the rest of these people, and that this is a world that he created. So they, not that they're going to worship him, like I'm not saying that, but just this idea that their entire existence depends on him continuing to maintain the reality they live in. And that's kind of interesting. And all he wants to do is wake up. He wants to get away from all this as quickly as possible and get back to the real world. I think what's interesting here, and this seems to be a new element in this version, because the description I read of the original did not mention this, so I think this is new, is that one of the characters, the wife of the DA, apparently is the one of the few people who never change in the dreams, right? So the way that everyone else in the dreams works, at least there's the main character who explains it, and we kind of see this as true at the end when we do start over the loop again, is that they all kind of move around in their roles, where, you know, the defense attorney becomes the judge in the next version of the dream, the priest that comes to see him becomes the juror, so on and so on. Like, they all kind of shift around in one way or another. And it's like, okay, that's interesting, I guess. But I think what they do here is that they say that the one person who never swaps is the wife of the DA. And he gives a reason for that. He says it's because that woman is his sister in real life, in the real world, right? So the main character's sister is at least who this wife looks like. And he theorizes that she really wants to see him be killed in the dream, and he kind of thinks that maybe that's based on the real world because him and his sister hate each other or something like that. Now, whether or not that's because they have beef in the real world and that's kind of influencing what his mind is doing, or it's just because he has beef with her that he's kind of villainizing her in his mind, even if it's inadvertently, I think that's open to some interpretation. But I think what caught me off guard about this is that it never really pays off in any way. So if I'm going to critique what they've added here, I do think it's interesting to say, hey, there's one person who never changes. There's a constant that, unlike everyone else, is consistent. But as soon as you say that to me, though, I'm expecting some kind of payoff to it. Whether that's just, you know, at the very least, I expected them to share a scene together. But you never see the main character and this wife, who's really his sister in the real world, interact. They never have a scene together. And I thought that was a really strange choice. Like, you set up that she's really important, perhaps, to the backstory of whatever is going on here, and then they never even interact. That is really strange to me. Also, the idea that she's not changing because it's based on his sister also feels like a bit of a weird thing later on, because we find out that the priest that comes to see him is based on his real father. I guess the difference might be that his father in the real world is dead, and maybe that's why, or something. But he switches around. He becomes a new person in the next version of the dream, but the DA's wife, not that we see her again, because we're only in the courtroom at the end, but she seemingly does not change each time. And that felt like they were putting in a big hint, or something that was alluding to, like, the real reason why he's here. And I think that's maybe the difference between this and the original. And again, I don't really remember the original that well, so I just kind of read a summary of it to try and refresh my mind. Is that the original seems more about just this nihilistic sense of dread that you can't get out of the nightmare. I think this one offers up a few little shreds of, like, possibilities or reasons why things are happening, or to get your mind going, but it also never actually takes them far enough to make them feel like they're completely fleshed out. And it's kind of a shame, actually, because I think it's a really interesting story, and I was always engaged with it. I was always intrigued, especially once it started becoming more about the side characters rather than the one who was actually up for murder, because I think them questioning the reality, well, I did think it didn't, like, I felt like it could have done with building up a little bit slower, but you need more time for that, obviously. But that is absolutely the more engaging and interesting part of the episode. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the man who's scared of death, but I think what's interesting here is the main character's reaction to all this. He's very frustrated, of course, and he wants out, but they don't play it as this, like, he is going manic, which from the sounds of it, the original was a bit more like, oh, scared of being killed again, whereas here it's more just like, I want out of this loop, I want to get back to the real world. It feels a little bit more modern in the way that they tackle it, I guess. Not necessarily to say that it's better than the original version of the story, but just that the lens of which they view his predicament and that he's trying to break out of the loop to get back into the real world feels a bit more skewed towards a science fiction story that has some sense of rules, as opposed to just a bleak, oppressive, you're stuck here forever kind of thing, even though they're both technically doing the same thing. But this idea, though, that it shifts to the side characters, and it's more about them coming to terms with their existence, it only is relative to this other person, and that they might not get to live anymore if everything changes. And there's that moment of dread right before, right as the man is being hanged, where you see them blink out of existence one by one, and the DA sees his wife disappear. He sees the defense attorney disappear, and he sees like some furniture and stuff disappear. I mean, that's not as dramatic as the people, but it's still something. It's like, hey, the world is starting to disappear out of existence. I think the idea that the characters that aren't the ones who are going to be killed are the ones who end up being the most scared by the end is quite interesting, because the main character by this point, well, he obviously doesn't like being taken to the gallows. He doesn't like the fear of death and all these things. He just kind of like he's kind of losing his mind a little bit. He's laughing when he gets the death sentence again because he's just heard it so many times, and he's just used to this feeling now, this eternal dread or this eternal predicament that he's in. Whereas the other characters, because they're not aware of their predicament, they just basically learn for the first time that they're in danger of losing their life, and then panic just as they've got enough time to come to terms with that's what's happening, and then they're gone. So I guess there's almost like a philosophical question to ask here. Like, what's more horrific, the guy who's aware of his situation and that he's doing this over and over again, or the ones who think everything's okay but then very quickly have to realize, oh no, our entire reality is a lie and we're about to die? That's like, is that worse? Is that more tragic in some ways? I don't know, but it's worth thinking about at the very least. Yeah, honestly, this story feels like and obviously again, it's based on like the original episode, right? But it does a few new things with it. It kind of feels like just writers in a room who kept saying, and what if this, and what if this. And I don't really feel that they ever got to a point where they said, this is what our story is about, and this is the point that it's going to make by the end. It kind of feels like they didn't add any more meaning to the story, but they added on a few other extra elements to the layers that were there that just made it more kind of wild, and said, hey, what if this, and what if, we added these family connections, what if we alluded to what his life was like in the real world, and all that kind of thing, and almost turns it into like a meta story about like the creator and all of the people inside the creation. Like, I don't know, there's something there to that, even though it never maybe goes full fleshed out and never really pays off a lot of those things. It definitely is always interesting, it's always engaging, and I'm not mad about it. It's definitely not going to be living up to, or like, being at the top of my best of list for the season, I don't think, because it just has enough things that don't quite pay off or feel like they come together that I can't completely recommend it. But as far as stories in this season have gone, this is definitely more recommended than a lot of them, just purely because it is doing something interesting, even if it's not a complete success. But I mean, maybe I'm being harsher than other people are on this. I think when it got to the end, I felt a little underwhelmed with just, okay, like nothing actually changed and it happened exactly like you said it would, which makes sense if your story's about the dread and the idea that you can't change anything and how just miserable and desolate that makes you feel. But at the same time, it's a story, and I was kind of expecting there to be some impact by the end. But hey, regardless, it's definitely the more interesting of the two in this episode, and it's kind of curious to maybe I'll be curious to go back and watch the original version again now when this is fresh in my head, to see how it handles things a little bit differently. Because I feel like this one, the characters just start openly talking about what if we're not real, what if we're this. And I'm sure it's not that vague in the original, but I wonder if the original is a bit more nuanced, because I genuinely do not remember. I'll have to go back and check. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Shadowplay. That was by far the more interesting of the two. The second story I'm not going to have too much to say about, I don't think. It's about an opera singer, or someone who wants to become an opera singer. She's training, and she's going to lessons, and she's working with this musician to try and develop her technique. But the story very quickly reveals that it's about the fact that her young sister, who's still like a teenager, has got cancer and she's dying. And we spend some time with her practicing her singing, and we see her go home, and she's nice with her parents, and they all have quite a happy family life. But when she goes up to see her sister who's sick, it gets very sappy. There's sad piano music, and the setup of the story that gets everything going is that the dying sister, as she's talking about dying, and she's talking about how she wants her sister to be successful and go on to be an opera singer, and she's having her doubts. Like the main character, Rosemary, she is basically thinking that it's never going to happen. Like she likes the idea of doing it, and she's trying her best, but she's kind of like a little disillusioned and thinks that it's not going to actually go through. And her little sister is like, no, you have to stick with it. And then there's a shooting star, and the little sister makes a wish. This is a wish story. And the wish itself is basically, well, I mean, we never actually find out what the exact wording of the wish is, but seemingly it's to convince her sister to follow her goal, her dreams of being an opera singer. And the main chunk of the episode is that when the little sister's taken to hospital and Rosemary goes to visit her, they hear some music in the distance, and her little sister says, "Follow the music, follow the music." And she goes outside, and one of the details that was brought up very quickly earlier in the story, when she was talking to her mum, is that it's 1966. I think they said, because there's a whole little joke where the mother's she makes dresses. She made a dress for someone, and was being critiqued that it was 1966 and not 1946. So it sets up early on that this is a period piece to begin with. But what happens is when she hears the music at the hospital and she walks down the hallway trying to follow the sound of the music, we get a very rudimentary transition effect where we get like a sort of swirl effect on the screen where the entire screen like distorts and spins. And then when it unspins and she's still walking down the hospital, she gets outside and she sees the newspaper. She freaks out because the year says 1986, so present day at the time of the episode. And she hails a cab because she sees like the opera advert in the newspaper or whatever. And there's a little bit of local stuff here to sort of show how things have changed, where she gets the name of something wrong and the cab driver thinks she's a tourist or she's from out of town. And obviously the joke just here is, no, something changed its name in the period between 66 and 86. And it's just showing the time difference there. It's the sort of thing where I don't get the reference, but from context, it's easy to see what they're doing. So, but she goes to the opera, and the reveal here is that she's the opera singer, right? Like, her 20 years older is in the opera, and the people outside are excited to see her. They think it's a big deal that they're seeing her. And she goes in and watches the show. She buys a ticket off a lady, and she just sort of stares in awe at herself singing this opera, and she's mouthing the words alongside. Probably my favorite thing of all of this bit, to be honest, because I didn't really think it's a bit sappy, and like the time travel element just feels a little bit whatever. Because ultimately it all just boils down to, hey, follow your dreams. See, I'm showing you that it's going to happen, so keep doing it. And like the final narration kind of just sums up and says, hey, yeah, the best thing you can do for someone who's got a dream is to encourage them to follow it. That's basically the gist of the whole story, right? Which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's just not that exciting or that interesting. It's kind of one note. But there's a moment when she's watching herself at the opera where the woman sitting next to her looks over at her and starts to sort of recognize that she looks the exact same, albeit a little bit younger, but looks the exact same as the woman on the stage. And kind of has this moment where she sort of double takes and looks backwards and forwards a little bit. And then she eventually just looks at her again and just kind of shrugs and smirks and says, oh well, isn't that weird? And just moves on and stops paying attention to her after that. And I actually really liked that moment, just because it felt like for a second it was going to become a bigger plot point where she was going to start asking her about, hey, you look a lot like her. Explain this, or something. And I'm like, this is actually the realistic version of this. The realistic version, if you were at a show of any kind, whether it's opera, stand-up comedy, whatever it may be, could be anything, and you're sitting next to someone in the crowd who looks identical to the person on stage, you would notice it. You would kind of like process it and maybe think, are they related or something? Like, is it just a weird coincidence? But ultimately, you would just sort of shrug it off, smile and go, that's weird, and keep it to yourself, because it would be incredibly rude to start harassing someone just because they happen to look like someone on stage. This felt like the realistic. I was actually impressed that they didn't do anything else with it, because this is exactly what would happen, or it should happen at the very least. So yeah, and there's a whole bit where she like gets her way backstage, and they do a thing here where they sort of pretend that the old version, and her sister, because she's got another sister. The young one does die, right? Seemingly, right? She is going to die, but she has another sister who's like in between the two ages, and she's there to see her at the show, and they're talking backstage. But they do this whole thing where she can't see the younger version of herself, right? It's like she's a ghost almost. Like they can feel a draft coming from the door opening, but they can't see her. And that just feels like, well, yeah, whatever. It's just to explain why they don't have any sort of confrontation, because by this point in the episode, we're nearly done. But she gets back to her real time. She goes back to the hospital and just kind of goes through the wormhole again, whatever you want to call it, and just hugs her sister, who's dying. And the episode ends with her on stage rehearsing for a show. Right? She's stuck with it. She's going to be an opera singer. That's it. That's the whole thing. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with it. It's not like the message is fine. It's a sweet message. It's just a little bit overly sappy. You have the younger sister come out, and she's in like the kind of the big nightie that looks like something you'd wear at the hospital, and she's melancholic, sort of, oh, I want you to be successful, my sister. I love you dearly. You're my favorite family member. I'll make a wish. My wish has come true, sister. Like, it's just a little bit on the sappy side, and could use maybe a bit more of a restrained kind of approach to things. I guess as well, it's also kind of, I think it's inherently a little bit less interesting, and unless you have something more to do with like what they see in the future, it's a little bit less interesting than the opposite, which is the It's a Wonderful Life version of this story, where you see the world without yourself to make you appreciate your place and like what you contribute to everyone else, or seeing your past and like being reminded of something that you need to be reminded of. While this, in theory, could be the most exciting because you're seeing the future, that's not what the story's interested in. Like, like I said, that one little conversation with the taxi driver is the extent of the time travel fish out of water element. Everything else is just all about the sentimental, like, hopes and dreams part of the story, which is fine. I did think that at least maybe they should have had a moment where when the cab driver told her the price for the cab, that maybe she should like freak out about it, because like if so it's 2025. Imagine you from 2005 were asked to pay what the 2025 price of a taxi was. You'd probably do a double take and say, what the hell, that's far too expensive, because it's been going up gradually for 20 years. Maybe that didn't happen as much in the 60s to the 80s, but I'm going to assume that it did, because I feel like inflation's been a constant thing in one form or another. But anyway, that's just a nitpick more than anything. I was kind of expecting like a little joke moment like that. They kind of almost did it when she was buying the ticket from the lady who had extras, and the lady said $25, and she's like, "What, for balcony?" And they don't do it as a time thing. They're like, I thought it was going to be, oh wait, that sounds like an extortionate amount to 1966 people. But it was more just, no, it's a good opera singer. This is like the best of the best. So yeah, you charge a high price, as opposed to like the 20 years of inflation having anything to do with it. So I don't know. I guess ultimately what I'm saying here is that I'm far more interested in the time travel than I am the sappy hopes and dreams part of the story, which is just kind of, like I say, it's very vanilla. It's very one note. There's not much to it. So anyway, that's the episode. We have one more episode left of season 1, believe it or not. We're almost done, and I do believe I did ask Cindy, who sponsors this series, if she wanted a top 5 or top 10 stories of the season. I don't know how many it'll be yet. I kind of need to wait and see when I go through and make the list. Like, is it enough for a 10, or is a 5 a better number? It just kind of depends how many I feel passionate about ultimately when I make the list. But she did say she wanted me to do that, because I did that with the classic Twilight Zone. So I'll be doing that as a video between season 1 and 2. Although I think I'm actually doing a different show instead of season 2 for a while. So Twilight Zone may be going away for a little bit, but that's okay. I'm sure we'll be back to it at some point. But yeah, that is my thoughts on the episode. Let me know what you thought of this one if you've seen it. As per usual, I think the episodes are on YouTube. If you want to go find I mean, they're split up. They're individual like stories, but you can find them on YouTube. So thank you very much for joining. I do appreciate it. You can, of course, support the channel and all the content both here and over at MaleFuzz Movies over at patreon.com/MaleFuzzTV. Check out the movie podcast over there, and any support from anywhere is greatly appreciated. So if you prefer doing YouTube membership, that's also greatly appreciated. But that is me. So thank you very much for joining. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV in the Twilight Zone.